the Pod Network Entertainment.
You're listening to the Adobo Talks podcast, The Business of Creativity, a series of high-level inspirational and educational sessions on how creativity unleashes inventive solutions that fuel the economy. In each episode, we'll be learning essential lessons through conversations with some of the brightest minds in the creative industries. I'm Angel Guerrero, founder and editor-in-chief of Adobo Magazine. Joining me today, one of the Philippines' most accomplished storytellers. His film, On the Job, was featured at the Cannes Film Festival, winning the Best Actor and the Jury Prize at the Puchon International Film Festival. In this sequel, On the Job, The Missing Eight entered the main competition for the Golden Lion at the Venice International Film Festival. With a career spanning nearly 30 years, he's one of the country's most awarded film directors, and I hear a very discerning foodie. It's an absolute pleasure to have on Adobo Talks podcast, director Erik Matti. Welcome, Direct.
Thank you, Angel.
It's such a pleasure
Nice
to
be
see
here.
you. I know we've known each other for some time, and I remember screening On the Job
Yes,
for Adobo
for
Magazine
Adobo.
some years ago, and it was really such a pleasure to see how you transition from advertising into film and the success of your films that you've done. Now, but before we dive into your career, I understand that you've been living proof of how you don't always follow, what you took in university. In fact, some people didn't realize that you entered college for biology
Oh, yeah.
and ended up not finishing. So can you tell us a little more about Erik Matti, the student, and what it was, about college that made you want to pursue something else?
So that was probably 1985, 1986. Back then, I had a sister who was already a doctor. So like all families, like most families, they all want you to be a doctor, be a lawyer. So I thought I wanted to be a doctor. So I went into biology. And then my mom, after one semester in biology, said, you know what's the in thing now? Nurses. I mean, everyone's moving to another country as a nurse. So maybe you should move to nursing because it's a shorter
I
course.
can't imagine Erik Matti being a nurse, though.
Me too. So I moved to nursing.
All right.
And then, and I already joined the theater company then. I started theater way back when I was second year high school, and I keep on joining all these drama clubs in Bacolod. And after one sem in nursing, I really didn't want to be a nurse. So without telling my mom, I moved to mass communications. And
Good for you.
Yeah, and the funny part was there's a capping on second year in nursing. So my mom, after 2 years, how come we're not invited to the capping of your nursing course? And that's when I actually
tell
told her,
her. Okay.
that I already moved to
And how
another.
did she take it?
My dad, when he heard it, because they were there, my dad said, "What are you gonna be, a dancer?" Because that's their idea of a mass comm student, right? But then I never finished. Did you know that? I never finished. I stayed in college for 6 years. I was president of the Mascara Theater Ensemble for maybe 3 years. It's a theater group founded by Peke. And then I didn't finish college. And then Peke would usually hire graduate students. No? So he did a workshop in Bacolod. I eventually, after my first year as a student, he invited me to be a teacher in the second year. And then after that, he said, "Do you wanna?" He thought I was already a graduate. So, would you like to join us in Manila as a script continuity? And I remember when I arrived here, he said, "You didn't even ask how much you're gonna be paid." He just said yes.
You just knew. You
Because
loved it.
I wanted it, right?
Of course.
And then he found out I wasn't a graduate. So
But it's too
I was
late, I
lucky.
guess.
Yeah, it was too late. I was already here.
All right. Well, from there, I know, before Peke got you and everything, but you did end up in doing films for advertising.
Yeah.
And I recall that's when I first met you. That's when I knew what you did. And then, you worked as a director and DOP for commercials. Now, what lessons did you learn from that experience? I mean, I also want to know what kind of campaigns you came out with, so I can be familiar with the work that you did before when you were in the advertising industry.
I have a funny beginning in advertising. So I already did. I did a lot of advertising as an assistant director for Peke.
I
Because
see.
Peke,
So Peke was also doing
yes,
advertising
he
work.
did a lot
All
of the
right.
San Miguel
Right.
commercials, the Gold Eagle commercials.
Indeed, yeah.
A lot of the what's the bank of the government?
PNB?
The other one, DBP.
Okay.
You know,
DP, yes.
where they do ads. It's like a annual report, right?
Okay.
Like the irrigation in Tacloban
I see.
has already started. We built this.
Oh, very cinematic.
We built this piggery in, So he'd usually do that.
I see.
And I was AD, and then I got my first break as a director in movies. And then I only moved into advertising because eventually, after Scorpio Nights, I became an in-house director for Viva. I wasn't a freelance. And then I did several movies with them. And then I got tired because I kept on doing all these bold movies. I wrote a horror movie and they didn't want to produce it. So after a while, I got pissed. I asked permission, can I do a movie outside? So I did a movie outside. That's where I did Prosty.
Okay, yeah.
I did Gagamboy, with Mother Lily. I did Manopo. And Viva wanted me back.
Oh, Manopo is yours.
Yeah,
I had
the
no
second one.
idea.
The second one.
Cool.
So Viva wanted me back
Okay.
in their fold.
Yeah.
But there's nowhere in the contract that says I can go back.
I see.
And I loved it that I was able to do a superhero,
Yeah.
a small superhero movie, an all-star ensemble, prestige drama with Manopo, So everybody, the Viva complained. So, and you know how these producers talk.
Yeah.
So all my projects got stalled.
Okay.
And I had my first daughter then. I had a first kid. I was still married. So I had nowhere to go. So I said, maybe I could go into advertising. So I started I started in Out of the Box. And the funny beginnings I did Quick and Roughs. Have you heard about those?
No. What are Quick and
The
Roughs?
Quick and Roughs is a PNG coined word.
Okay.
They have a board. You'll do pre-prod. They'll brief you. You'll do pre-prod. You'll produce it, and then they'll test it.
For testing. Okay.
And then when they test it and it passes the
research.
it goes into full production, and it's no longer me. It's Henry Frejas who's gonna do it. It's
Oh, I see.
it's Dindo Angeles.
Right, I get
who's
it.
gonna
So you did
direct
the
it.
Quick and Roughs, yes.
Yeah,
Like
so-
the pre of the actual film.
Yes,
Yeah.
I only got out of it when one of the Quick and Roughs I made, this homage to action movies, where a guy who gets dragged in mud as Lito Lapid, and then he used Tide to take out the
Yeah.
the
stains.
the stains.
Yeah.
And they wanted Lito Lapid. We got a look-alike, and then it scored really high. That they said, no, we'll just air this as
Oh,
is.
fantastic. That
and
must
that's
have
when
been really
and that's when I got mainstream gigs. Right
I
after that.
see. So when film didn't do you well, you said I do advertising.
Yes.
And I guess advertising pays well, would you say?
Yes.
Vis-a-vis film? I'm not sure.
It pays really well.
Okay.
And that's my problem. I kept on telling, because after a while I was looking for the movies, and I demanded. I was directing a lot of commercials, 4 or 5 commercials a month, and after a while,
4 or 5 commercials a month?
Yeah.
Well, that's a lot.
and you after a while you want. You're looking for a way to go back to movies, but in advertising, it's quite a selfish.
It consumes you.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
guess.
Wife, right? Wife or mistress, right?
Yes.
It's very selfish. If you don't do a commercial for 2 3 months, agencies forget about you. If you keep on saying no. So I told our company. I was then already part of our own company, and I said, I want to slow down in advertising, and I want to go back into
How many
movies.
years were you in advertising, doing film?
So I started with a
Commercials.
quick and roughs, maybe 2003, 4, and then I stopped doing it. Started to go out of advertising around 2011,
Okay.
2012.
So it's a close a decade.
But I still did a few. One of
Films.
the few commercials I did last was the Nadine Lustre, James Reed, Jollibee series.
okay.
Like with the dad.
Yes, yes.
Like I started that campaign. There's probably I probably did 4 of those, 3, 4 of
What do you
those.
think you were known for? What was your style in advertising?
I'm mainly narrative.
Okay.
I'm so together with Henry Frejas, Dindo Angeles, Raul Ona.
Yes, I remember all
Those
of them.
those
Yeah,
are
they're still.
the directors, Mark Kerubin,
Yes, of course.
right? And I barely do lifestyle ads. I did a few with Bing Beltran, with the notorious Bing Beltran,
Yes.
because he has such high demands. I always end up with the
Difficult ones.
with the difficult
The
ones,
difficult creators.
right?
So
I
which
did a
which
lot
co-
with
TB,
Tibua.
TBWA. Okay. And if you had one commercial that you'd say, I was proud to do this ad. Which one would you pick?
There's several I really love. There's one really dark commercial that I did that McDo. I don't usually do McDo. I don't do premium looking ads, but for the first time, they allowed us to do a cancer story,
Okay.
right? Of somebody who's at the break. I mean, in the last days of her life, she woke up and the husband was finding it really hard to go through it day to day, and then he wanted to make this day a little bit different. So he went out, bought nothing fancy, no food. He just went out. I didn't even shoot him in the. He just went back with a bag and put it beside the wife who's sleeping. That's it. And then they aired it for. So we were excited. They aired it for 1 2 days. And then they pulled it out because they thought
It was too dark, perhaps.
it's too horrible. But
But you liked it,
I
right?
liked it
Yeah.
because it was honest. It was,
Yes, I think it's sort of built into what you eventually
yeah,
became in terms of director.
And I think that's what's interesting as a director. The balance, it could really go tacky and bad and exploitative.
Correct.
And so the amount of work that you put in order for it not to go that route.
Yeah, so it's
is
measured.
really,
yeah.
it's the measure you yeah. So
Interesting. I'd have to take a look at that commercial. But since they pulled it out, it might not be anywhere. I might not find it. Well, now let's move on to your film career. One of the very first movies you wrote was Magic Temple with the legendary, I don't know if you guys know, I mean, those who are listening who don't know who director Pekka Gayaga is, he's a legendary filmmaker and was your mentor, correct? So you were working with him on Magic Temple. Can you tell us, like, what was the experience like and what makes for a good movie script secondarily?
yeah, I'm really proud about how I started in the industry because there was a high demand coming from the mentor I was working with. A high demand in terms of you're not just thinking about actors, you're not just thinking about story, you're also thinking about how it looks, to give an impression of something really visual. When he first approached me for and we didn't know where it was gonna be produced. He just wanted to move into the fantasy genre, and he said, "Come up with a story." And at that time, I was just thinking up of all these stories. I don't know if it's even executable at all.
Okay,
If any of us
Because
could
if you're allowed
execute
to
it.
do fantasy, you don't know if you're gonna actually do it.
like
Yeah.
like a talking bird or a bird that comes on command. You're just hoping that there might be a trained bird out there. So I started writing it, and then of course it came out really big. I imbibed that writing process eventually when I became a director. So what Peke does is it starts with a storyline. Whoever writes it, he talks about it, or I write it, or Lori writes it, and then they read it, and then they have all these ideas in their head. Then we sit down for a script writing, and all of us would, this is the kind of movie. This is where it should go. And after that, okay, who does the first draft? So Angel, go write it first. So you're stuck there.
On your typewriter.
Yeah, the typewriter. They're probably drinking,
Waiting for you to come,
eating,
yeah.
And then that night, like a rough assembly of storyline. This first scene, dinner. They look at it, and then they say, "Okay, I know what to do with it." And then he sits on it, or Laurie sits on it and writes his own stuff. The next day, we look at it again. You get what I mean?
It's so
And that goes on for
and it's a trust, I guess, in each other's talents.
Yeah. And then after 3-4 days, you have like a working template with no dialogues of what the script is gonna be. And then
So it's basically the story, but not the script.
yeah, and then Peke, who only speaks English, right, doesn't know how to write Tagalog, will write the dialogues there and then passes it on to Lori, and Lori translates it to Tagalog.
I see. What an interesting process. So Peke had a process where he allowed everyone to have a piece of it.
Yes.
And work out the story, then eventually the script, and then off you go into production.
Because if you're working on so many elements, you need to listen to a lot of people. You can't just be the voice that everyone has to listen to. In my work, for example, up to now, even PAs could point out, there's something wrong with and it's valid. No one's going to be shouted at for
giving their opinion
in a
on
meeting.
nuances that they pick up.
That's why Zooms can't work on meetings with me.
I
because
couldn't agree more. You can't get that
yeah,
creative.
you can't get that. Everyone's
momentum.
turned off their
And everybody's being very polite, right? Like you can't really say what you want to say.
And everyone wants to be concise, brief, because in Zoom there's the feeling that you need to finish it immediately, right? Rather than in a meeting where you can see each other, you can, somebody jokes, and then you get another
an idea in your head. Yeah, I get that. So from you were a writer and you created storylines, and then of course you're also
I'm not
a director.
really a good writer.
Right.
I forced myself to be a writer because what I know to be a good director is a good director also writes. Right?
Okay.
But when I met my wife, my wife Michiko Yamamoto,
Yes.
I realized, oh my God, I'm no writer. So that's why I don't want to be the auteur anymore. And I'm honest enough to say, okay, somebody else has to write it for me.
So the thing is, when you say the craft of writing, of course, is very different from somebody who has a story in their heads and wants to put it out there.
Yeah.
Right? You are the man who has the ideas and the story.
I've never done a commissioned work, ever.
I see.
And that's why it was tough for me to get off the ground my projects, because I don't. Number one, not a lot of people trust me with a script, and the first name in mind is Erik.
Right.
No, they usually think, let's have Joyce Bernal do it. Let's have Kathy Garcia Molina do it. Olivia Lamazan, all those, Joel Lamangan. So with me, I'm forced to really come up with my own ideas, sell it to producers, and convince them as much as I could that this is going to be a good movie.
Wow, that is really something. To say that you didn't work on commission work and you had to sort of create these stories and pitch it yourself and see if it flies. I guess it's been very successful since then.
So far, yes.
Now, we talk about your recent movies, right? I mean, really, On the Job, you had Buy Bus. These are horror and crime thrillers. Why do you think that is? I mean, what do you have to say about their overlaps in your mind, also of the two movies? I mean, the thriller and horror. What got you into that? And you do it brilliantly.
Thank you. Well, when I went into movies looking at all the classics that have been taught in universities and, film appreciation classes. And they're mostly tackling not just crime, not just horror, but they're tackling more substantial themes and stories. And how you wish, in as much as you really want your movies to make money, you wanna bring in some sort of depth into it. And when you're in the Philippines, I gravitate towards crime. I gravitate towards a bit of the supernatural.
Did you find it difficult, though, to get into the
It's
crime?
hard. It's hard.
I thought so.
For a time, I made myself believe that, okay, maybe I can do a love story. I can do romantic comedies. But I can't. That's not how I'm made of. I really want Godfather, Goodfellas, Raging Bull, The Insider of Kurosawa,
I see. I get it
Ran,
now.
Kagemusha. You get what I mean?
Yes.
You want those not just big stories, but big themes and it was hard. It took us so long. I was working on the fringes. I'm neither mainstream. I'm neither independent art house, because I don't do art house per se, right? My movies are always narrative based, nothing esoteric. So it took me a long while. It was only until On the Job that, and nobody understood it when it was released in the local cinemas. The trailers looked weird. We didn't know how to position it. Is it an action or is it star driven because you have Piolo?
Yes.
And so it was a weird kind of trailer, and it didn't make so much money here. But then there was Cannes, and when it was released in the U.S. With the international cut, it eventually made it back here a year later through downloads. And that's where the best things you hear about On the Job from the Philippine market, that's where you heard it a year later.
Sometimes that can happen that way, right? It takes a while. So why did you find it difficult you said it was difficult to make horror and crime? I mean, I know there's...
Because it's a tough sell. If you think about producers who will be willing to produce it, most of the studios really want those light-hearted films.
That's true.
Right? And if unless it's a prestige project, but if it's a small horror movie, they're not really convinced that you're gonna be a priority in their slate of
Now I
movies.
understand. So that's the difficult part of it.
So that's the difficult part of it. So who do you go to? You keep on selling the projects.
So who produced On the Job?
On the Job, we were about to do it as an indie movie because for 4 years I went around.
For 4 years.
For
you were
4
pitching
years.
For 4 years.
I
Wow.
wrote the script, took a break from advertising for 6 months, wrote the script, and then after writing the script, I sent it without talking to any producer. I sent it to John Lloyd and Piolo. And then I said, choose your role. So I was so scared that it comes back and they want the same role, right? But I have roles for them in my head.
Right, yeah.
They both chose the roles I have in mind for
good.
them.
That worked out.
But then John Lloyd was just the anointed golden boy of Star Cinema after One More Chance. Of course, they don't want him to do a prisoner role.
So what happened?
to
In the
dirty
end,
up
Piolo got it,
the
yeah.
debonair. And,
Yeah. I get, yes,
Right?
of course.
But
They didn't want him to take that role,
yeah,
of course, yeah.
But John Lloyd really got pissed because I took Gerald in And he found out later, and he said, why wasn't I part of it? I already said yes, right? So eventually we made Honor Thy Father because he couldn't get past the idea that he wasn't able to do On the Job.
On the Job. Now, On the Job did really well, and it's also on Netflix, correct?
On the Job
t-
was released first in Netflix North America.
And that did really well, as you said.
That did really well. We sold it in 14 territories: Japan, New Zealand, Germany, France, UK. We sold it all over we've done a few options for remakes in Hollywood. There's one in Chile. There's one in there's one that we're working on now with India. So they're looking
So
at
there's a
it that
theme
way.
of, like, say, drugs and violence, and of course politics that play.
Yeah.
And it seems to be how to call it. I guess some countries can relate to it, and probably that's why it does
Yeah.
well.
The reason why my kind of movie survived is because I realized that if you just gun for the local, and eventually I think you're going to ask the question about how can we grow our movies. I realized early on that if we're just going to rely on the local audience and they're going to ask for the same kind of stories that they're used to, right? The funny ones, the melodrama, the family
rom-coms,
dramas, the
right?
rom-coms. No other voice is going to come out of it except the ones who's just going to be subservient to those kinds of stories, right? So I realized early on I need to widen the market in order for me to be able to do what I want to do. So widening the market is really thinking your movie has to be still very local, but at the same time could be universal, and that everyone can relate to it. Of course, there's a few, like with Malaysia, for example, our horror movie. I did a horror movie, The Entity, with Sharon and John Arcilia, which we released in Southeast Asia. In Malaysia, some parts that pertain to religion and all those things.
Oh yeah, they're
they
very
need
sensitive about
Yeah,
that.
they need to take it out, like nudity. They take it out, but we don't look at it anymore. We just allow the streamers to do it for us.
But in this day and age, Eric, I notice your films and your content, whether it's a miniseries or not, is getting traction in Netflix. You also have something in HBO. I mean, it's a lot of people's dreams to have content made and streamed globally through these platforms. Now, how did you get, for instance, you have On the Job, you have Buy Bus, and I know you're coming out with something new.
Yeah.
And you've done content for food. I mean,
Yeah.
you did street food and all that. Now, how does one get into getting their work or their scripts or even their content out to these wonderful streamers?
I don't know. I don't know if I'm saying this a bit clueless or dense, right?
You'll never
need to
be.
assert. We need to assert ourselves.
Okay, so it's that.
We need to assert ourselves with the material we're doing, that we deserve ambitious stuff, right? What I notice, because we're also producers, right? So we ask people to pitch to us. When you look at the script, from the get-go, you can see that they've already edited it in order for it to fit a budget that they think a Filipino movie should
Could
be
afford,
spent on.
to spend on, yeah.
But
yeah,
these
yeah.
streamers, remember, if it's that small movie, they'll just license it. License it,
yeah, rather than produce
just part
it.
of the library. But if you're gonna pitch to them, they want to see big ideas. They want to see ideas that they could show to another country, and sometimes you don't know if it's even gonna be good. But the basic idea of the story should be a little bit more ambitious, and that's when they could say. And of course, they look at your filmography if you can do it, because
Of course, they chose
they're
Erik
gonna-
Matti for all these. I mean, we were talking earlier that you got Buy Bus in, and you're doing a new one. You want to talk about
the
that?
on the job, the second season of On the Job.
Yeah, second season On the Job is coming up.
And we finished Call My Manager.
Okay.
the Philippine adaptation of the French series Call My Agent.
Yes, isn't that great, guys? So Eric
Yeah.
is doing Call My Agent, but Philippine version.
Yep. Yep.
And he got a chance to produce it, so we should be looking out for that. I've watched the French version,
Yeah. Well,
and I loved it.
I loved it.
And of
Yeah.
course, it's actually in French. It's 10%, which is the commission, but it's hilarious. Can you talk a little bit about
yeah.
that?
So imagine projects like those. It took us a long. Our pre-production. We don't have a fast turnaround of projects. We did call my manager. Probably did writing for 8, 9 months of it, and then did pre-production for 3, 4 months before we even went into production, into shooting. Um, we don't rush it because at the back of your head, we're not just satisfied with, you know, showing it to the Filipino audience and they'd be happy with it. You're thinking you're competing with the rest of the world. If you're releasing it,
You have to have that in your mind.
yeah,
that-
and you have to be really careful. You have to be really careful. All the gags, all the one, it has to work in the Philippine context as funny or heartwarming, but also you're thinking, is this universal enough? Can people relate to it?
Well, I think you've cracked the code, Eric.
Hopefully,
done.
I
Well
continue
done.
to.
Well, thank you for sharing. What you've done, and I think that a lot of filmmakers would want to get into, Netflix and getting funding for their work. Now, you've recently been awarded an international grant, right, to produce The Squatter. Can you tell us what that experience was like, and perhaps share tips to other storytellers who want their hands in securing grants abroad?
One of my strengths, and I'm proud to say it, is I I know how to make a kick-ass deck.
Oh, do you? Okay, what's
Pitch
the
deck.
secret there?
So the pitch deck is you're not pitching it for yourself. You're pitching it for the ones who are listening to you. So you are pitching them what they want to hear. So you're ahead of yourself because you if you don't meet. Remember the squatter, for example. You just send the pitch deck, and you have no way of explaining the deck.
I
You
see.
have
They
no-
base it on what they
see,
the deck. Yeah.
what they see, and you also don't want to send. Somebody would pitch to me, Eric, can you help me get into Netflix? Can you help me? Yeah, sure. Let me look at your. But allow us to guide you through it, because we're the ones who's gonna face them and show your deck. They'd send us a 90-page deck, and I said, no one has the time to read.
So how short
like-
how short should a deck be generally?
So everyone wants it to be 25 or less
Okay.
slides. But given this one where you can't explain, you're not there to explain it. Because
Right.
my decks, when I'm there to explain it, I don't have paragraphs in it. I just have words. One word. Guilt. And then you talk about,
Yeah, yeah.
there's this woman who,
Yeah,
whose
yeah.
husband died and she feels guilty. And the next slide,
One
just
other
the
word,
house.
yeah.
Because you're there to expound on
Explain
it,
it,
right?
yeah.
But for this one, 25 slides is really challenging because you're not there. So you're looking at, will they understand this without this slide? So I ended up with 32 pages, which is not bad. Because I didn't want to go 35 and above.
And what's the size of a grant normally for a film like this?
This one, the grant is 50,000 euros
Okay.
for just the first script and the pitch deck to the financiers in
I see. It's
in
just a
Paris,
first step
in
before.
UK, in because this is a European festival, so their main financial model is really finding people who would want the content for Spain, for Italy, for Germany, for UK, and for Paris.
Okay.
And that's how they pull the
Yeah,
money.
so I think what you're saying is importantly is really when you think of a script, you don't just think for the Filipino audience. You really think for the different markets and
to
see
talk
if
to as
yeah,
many.
yeah,
And
whether it's from a producer's point of view or from a viewer's point of view.
yeah, and even with ideas and you know the substance of the script, it has to be progressive. It has to be it all these stories about us with do it for the family. That's just so Filipino,
Yes, it is.
right?
Yes,
no
you have
one
to go
no one
beyond that.
understands it
Yeah.
beyond our country, right? So it's tough, and immediately when you start with that, they go and say, "Oh, this is not for us."
Okay, let's go and talk about awards now. You know, people want to win an Oscar. Should we even ambition to win an Oscar here in the Philippines? I mean, is it something, you know, that we should even focus on? How important you think are these
When-
film festivals and international awards?
when we were sent on the job was sent to Oscars by the Philippines, we knew already that we were not gonna make it. But you don't wanna sit back and just
Right. Mope.
you
don't wanna
just have
mope.
to work around
Yeah.
your difficulties, but show them that you're working for it. So we only had the measly amount of money. You know what I did on the job for Oscars, the Missing Eight. I got in touch. So I met Bong Joon-ho in Venice, right? He was the head jury. So I got in touch with him because he just won Parasite. And I said, what was the secret, right? And we found out Samsung spent all the money, most of the money, to campaign
The marketing
for
Parasite.
Parasite. And they probably spent like near 12 million.
So it's not enough
dollars.
just to have a great film. You really have to market
Yeah,
it.
you've
So you
got to
put the money
get
behind
into
that.
everyone's radar.
Okay.
While we were even there, we did a few meetings while we're there. We were working, looking for other people that we can talk to. We went to CAA, which is the biggest talent management company. And when we were there, by the way, we're showing 3 of the Oscar contenders. They asked for us to show it. There's Paraguay movie. There's a Brazilian movie that they're showing. They're doing all those things
Okay, so
in
it's-
order to
so
get.
everybody wants to win an Oscar. It's just that there are steps and investments you need to take.
Yeah,
and
if
really
you're
select it out.
thinking
Yeah.
that it's just story that they're looking at, no way.
Okay,
no
got
way.
it, got it, got
Yeah.
it. Now, there's this long-standing stigma about Philippine films that they're of poor quality. Of course, we know it has a lot to do with budget. It also has a lot to do with time. We, as you say, just to produce something on Netflix, you really take some time to get it off the ground. But for movies here, it's very different, especially since, we know that we're competing against many other films out there today. What can we do to, say, raise awareness of these film industry, and how can we improve what we're currently doing, as well as support the production industry? There are lots of things we need to change, but we also know that there are limitations. How can this industry sort of move out from that stigma that Philippines is only
That's a complex situation.
Okay,
Good
let's try and
question, but
simplify it.
So number one, we are a small market, very small market. So producers tend to minimize investments, right? More so now after the pandemic, if you show your movie in a regular theatrical release, you're not sure if anyone's even gonna see it, right? Because the theaters are having a tough time bringing in the audience, except during Christmas. So you have all these producers who's thinking conservatively, but you can't turn heads. You can't make the audience turn their head towards your movie if you're thinking conservatively, because the big screen, you need a bit of spectacle. You need to,
Absolutely. Yeah.
so chicken or the egg,
Yeah.
right? But you want to be safe. I want to do this for just 12 million pesos. you don't expect people. That's why
To
our
go
first
to the
thought,
cinemas.
to
Yeah.
go do this, to go to the cinemas just for the 12 million
Yeah,
movie.
yeah.
We were even thinking when no movies were making money, the next step would be to do big prestige tentpole movies, because then
With bigger budgets, of
with
course.
bigger budgets and bigger marketing budget to excite an audience to go in. Because even now in the cinemas, when you bring in a big Hollywood movie, everyone goes out of their way to.
So how does one get funding for movies these days? I know there's Viva Entertainment, there's GMA,
Yeah.
right, locally, right? And would you deem the budgets small, or are they adequate?
It's so you pitch to a producer. There's, aside from the big wigs, you have ABS, Viva, and GMA, Regal, right? Aside from them, you go to the next. Signal is also starting to produce movies. You go to the next ones. You have Georgie Alonso's Quantum Productions. You have Erickson Raimundo with Cornerstone. You know, they have all these, which they also bring to the big wigs to ask for further money. But now you're looking at doing movies not just to release theatrically. Actually, that's not the first
That's not the first reason, right?
anymore.
Or
now.
objective, yeah.
But also, would Netflix or HBO
Take it on
or
and
Disney or
distribute it.
Amazon would also buy it,
Okay.
because those are two profit centers, right? You can sell it to the theaters and you get your money, but also after that, the life of the movie goes into streaming.
Streaming. Okay.
So you're thinking that way. Now, some people have come up with their own business models wherein let's do movies for 6 million, right? And then the streamer would probably buy it for 8 million. We make our 2 million back,
right.
right? But the streamers are also smart. We did a movie, an adaptation of a Korean melodrama, family drama. It's an intimate with Dali De Leon, Zanjo. Keys to the Heart is the title in Netflix. And we spent money on it, even if it's just a family domestic drama. And Netflix saw it and gave us a price that was also very good. They didn't look at it like a 6 million peso.
Right.
You get what I mean?
Yeah,
Because
so
these
it's a
people are-
nice opportunity actually for a lot of filmmakers
Yeah.
if they were able to get something out there and two models, right? Theatrical release, they get paid, and then from the streamers. So
Yes.
that's the ambition. So, what advice would you give struggling storytellers? You know, the ones whose passions have needed to take a step back in favor of financial stability. You know, I don't like to think that because I do promote the creative economy here. You know, in film, a lot of people do it for love rather than really it's a career. Now, there are a lot of struggling storytellers who want to make it out there. What advice would you give them? I mean, how can they survive in the film industry?
First and foremost, like on my end, Angel, I wasn't born like an artist, right?
Yeah.
I learned it. I
Learned
learned
it.
it. I started out more as a craftsman, and studied along the way. Where do I want to go? Who do I want to be? What kind of films should I make? Right? And you study it. You constantly study it. When I decided to go back into movies, and everyone has one step into like a bread and butter thing. You can do TV, and then I'll do movies on the side. I promised myself, I'm gonna walk the talk. So I sold a lot of the cars that I earned from advertising,
Okay.
got a diesel car,
Okay.
and then went into movies. And I've never done anything except movies. And you get what I mean?
Wonderful.
And it was tough. It was tough starting out. But
Yeah.
you're telling yourself, I'm gonna make it. I hope I'm gonna make it with my kind of stories. And good thing it did, right? It sort of paid off. And now I can say I really have a career in films, right? Imagine if I have a bread and butter you're not as hungry to do that one movie that's gonna make your mark, right? Because you're always
Okay, so you gotta invest in
you
yourself.
gotta invest on, yes,
Yeah.
you gotta be there day in day out. And I know it's old school, but you have all these people who's antsy to become directors.
Yeah, right
No,
away,
work,
yeah.
work from
Work
the
your
bottom.
way, yeah, work your way
Work
to
from the
it.
bottom. When everyone's talking, don't go surfing in Bolinao. You get what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
I
But
stay.
thanks for that advice,
Yeah.
Eric. It's really
The
important to
the first movie I got from mother, I had to be at her house every day, listening to all these press people. They're drinking. I don't know them. Every day until 3 a.m. in order for her to keep on seeing you, and
so you get
so
into
what
her
was your
radar.
story again?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
and then you
So you work your way through,
yeah,
really.
and it's listening around
Yeah.
you that you start to get the culture. You start to get to know people. You get what I mean? Rather than
So it's hard work, guys.
It's hard work,
Yeah,
yeah.
You have to really invest in yourself and commit to it. I think is that what Direct Eric's trying to say. Now, just one last question about you being a foodie. I know. We talked about you wanted to do a podcast on food, and you've done a few how to call it miniseries on Netflix for food.
Yeah.
Tell us about your passion for food and what's your favorite dish and why do you love food? I mean, is it cooking or the eating?
and it's connected to where I am now.
Okay.
The reason why I started going back to movies, to food, is because I was in advertising. I still hadn't had the chance to go back into movies because you produce a movie, it's expensive, right? And you're just looking for like a creative expression wherein it's in your control, in your full control, right? And I realized after reading a few of the Anthony Bourdain books, No Reservation, and I realized
Kitchen
maybe the
Confidential,
kitchen,
yeah.
maybe the kitchen is where you could express it, and instant gratification. You make the food, you send it out, you see the reaction of somebody if they don't like it or if they like it, right? You can concoct it in your own private kitchen and then wait for a reaction, and it's in your control. You decide how salty it is, how bitter it is. So that's when I started cooking and I started opening these restaurants.
Yeah, I remember I dropped by there before.
And then, but the bug for filmmaking is different, right? You want to work with other people, with other creative minds. You don't want to be stuck in a kitchen, and So
So now you're doing both. You have filmmaking,
Yes.
horror and everything, crime, and then you have these wonderful cooking programs that you actually shot. So you did what's it called? Street food?
Food lore
Food Lore. You did Food Lore
with HBO.
with HBO.
Yeah.
And you did a couple of programs in the Philippines. You did one you said in Bacolod.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I did an episode in Bacolod about food in general, the Philippines, talking about how food is culturally in the Philippines and how you could elevate it or keep it really simple.
So how's it different from, when you do film, you say you love narratives. How's it with food?
Well,
Right?
there's also a story in food, right? There's always a story. When you do a rustic barbecue, and you pair it with something really sour and sweet and sour, which is what the Filipinos like. It brings you to places. It brings you to a memory, to an event, right? That's why I love food. I love perfumes, for example, because
Really?
because perfumes also bring back the
Yeah,
smell.
yeah, sure.
Also brings you to places, to people.
What's your
you've met.
favorite dish, Eric? What do you like to eat?
I'm an egg guy.
Oh, an egg guy.
So if I die, the famous question always is, if it's your last meal,
What are you gonna have? An
and
omelet?
what will you have?
Yeah, what do you have?
And there should be an egg, a sunny side up egg,
Mm-hmm.
crispy on the whites,
Hot oil, yeah.
and really soft yolk.
Yolk in the middle. Okay.
Yeah, and then a really good pandesal or French bread with butter. That's it.
Well, I think that's really nice that a foodie goes back to a few basics that matter. Well, on that note, thank you very much,
Thank you.
Eric. And really, I think we're all inspired by you and your journey. And it's such a privilege to sit down and talk about
Thank
your
you.
films and, you know, how you started advertising and how you shifted from being a biologist to who you are today. Anyway, so thank you.
Not
and-
a lot know about.
well,
yeah.
cheers to you.
Cheers.
Here we go.
Thanks, Angel.
Thank you
so
very
much.
And that's all we have for this episode. Thank you for listening to and watching this episode of the Adobo Talks podcast with our very special guest, director Erik Matti. The Adobo Talks podcast, The Business of Creativity, is available on Spotify, SoundCloud, and on Adobo Magazine's platforms, including, by the way, YouTube. The Adobo Talks podcast, The Business of Creativity, is produced by Adobo Magazine, The Word on Creativity, in partnership with the Pod Network, and recorded in partnership with Hit Productions. Tune in next week for another insightful conversation with one of the brightest minds in our creative industries.
The opinions of podcast creators, hosts, and guests are not necessarily reflective of the official stance of the Pod Network Entertainment, its hosts, or other network programs. The content created by the people behind the podcast is personal and not meant to harm any religion, ethnicity, group, organization, company, or individual.